Hello, this is Candy with eyes2jesus.blogspot.com. It's been a while since I've done a bread making video, so I thought I would do one now and show you how I'm currently making bread. Now, my last bread making video, I showed you how I make yeast bread. Well, I made a sourdough starter and I'm back to making sourdough bread like I used to. I used to exclusively make sourdough bread, and then we got kind of tired of it, so I went for yeast bread for a while and my starter died because I neglected it. So I have a new starter and I'm going to show you how to make sourdough bread. You can do this with white flour, wheat flour, or you can mix in some rye, some spelt, so you have your options. I'm going to be doing white sourdough bread. Now, my sourdough starter that I have this time around is a white sourdough starter, but I can use this starter in any kind of leavened bread that I wish to make, but I'm going to be making white sourdough bread. My very first starter that I made years ago was a rye flour starter, and then a starter I had after that for many years was a whole wheat starter. So now I have a white flour starter. So first I'm going to tell you how to make a genuine, authentic, real sourdough starter. Because recall, we're going to make this bread without any commercial yeast at all. Alright, so choose a flour, choose either white flour, rye flour, or wheat flour. Wheat flour is the hardest to start, but it can work too. And rye flour and white flour is pretty easy. I want you to take a large container and I want you to put in 1 cup of the flour of your choice and 1 cup of a purified water. That can be a bottled water, or if you're on well water like I am, then well water is probably fine. I can use well water for all my fermentation stuff. Alright, so a cup of flour and a cup of water, mix it together really well. Then I want you to either put a lid on that you've kind of broken or put a cut into so that air can get in, or put over a double layer cheesecloth or some flour sackcloth on top and rubber band it on. So you want it covered, but you want it to have access to air. Stick that container into a dark cabinet and forget about it. The next day, that's all I want you to do is stir it, then cover it, put it back into the cupboard. The next day after that, I want you to add another cup of flour, and this time a ½ cup of water. Mix it in well, mix it good, cover it, stick it back in the cupboard. The next day, don't add anything, just mix it well, cover it, stick it back in the cupboard. I want you to keep doing this for 9 days. Now, after the last time you feed it, alright, so let's say you feed it the last day is day 6 or 7. Then don't feed it again until after you've used it for the first time. Let it sit in the cupboard unfed for 2 days before you use it for the first time. Now it's going to, depending on which flour you use, it's either going to have a very sour smell or it's going to have a very beer-like alcohol type smell. And once your starter really gets going, it's probably going to have both of those smells, and this is fine. You're also going to have liquid, a layer of liquid that's going to be on top that is called hooch. And it should be forming little bubbles. So I need to move to a bigger container, but this is where I've got my sourdough starter in right now, and I just put a few cracks in the lid, puncture cracks, so that air can get in. And here's what my starter looks like unmixed. So you have a lot of hooch liquid floating around on top. Alright, and then this is from the fridge, because after you use it for the first time, then keep it in the fridge. And I just took this straight out of the fridge. It is cold, and I'm going to use it. When making sourdough bread, you don't need to have things warm first. So, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix the hooch liquid into my sourdough starter. And this container is full, so I'm going to mix it very carefully. I'll be using my handy dandy 6-quart heavy duty KitchenAid mixer. I'm probably going to make 4 loaves of bread today. I might do 6, but looking at the time, I'm not sure that I have the time for that today, so we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to start by making my first 2 or 3 loaves in here. I can do 3 or 4 loaves at a time in my 6-quart, but it starts getting pretty full at 4 loaves. So I generally like to make 2 or 3 loaves at a time in my mixer. So you can also do this by hand in a big bowl and a nice wooden spoon and some clean, strong hands. And we will be working with the bread, so make sure jewelry is off and hands are clean. Alright, so I have this well mixed. It smells very sour in a good way. So well mixed, it just looks like runny, wet flour. All right. So, if you heard a fan just turn off, that was my oven because it takes a while for my oven to cool down, and I had baked tuna fish patties for our lunch earlier. So the oven just finished calming down, or cooling down. All right, so I'm just going to get ready. I'm going to use my mixer. I'm going to be using, of course, the dough hook attachment. All right, so let's get started with our leaven first. So let's get started by putting in sourdough starter. And I generally will do anywhere between a half cup and a whole cup of starter per loaf of bread. So I'm going to just get my spoon out. So I'm going to start with a couple of loaves. So I'm going to just stick in a 1 cup measuring cup into my sourdough container. So you can really see the consistency of the sourdough like this. You see, it's kind of stretchy. It's a thin, runny batter, but it's still got some thickness to it. And it is very well mixed. Your sourdough starter should not be lumpy, because if it is, those lumps are pockets of unmixed flour. And this starter is just flour and water and thyme, and it fermented, grew its own wild yeast, caught wild yeast, however that happens. So yeah, this bread is only going to be leavened with sourdough starter. This is an authentic sourdough starter that I have made from just flour, water, and thyme. Thyme as in T-I-M-E. All right, now we need to add some of the liquid components. I'm going to get out another measuring cup here. All right, and for liquid components, buttermilk, and this is homemade buttermilk. You can use store-bought, or if you make kefir or yogurt, you can use that as well. So I'm going to put in, it's going to come out kind of gloppy. It's straight from the cupboard. I'm going to put in 2 cups of homemade buttermilk. Now, I'm not going to add any water, but I'm probably going to need to add some water to get more liquid in here. Humidity and ingredients differ so often when making bread, you can never have exact measurements. All right, so I'm going to call it, that's going to be my liquid ingredients for now, is 2 cups of sourdough starter, 2 cups of homemade buttermilk. So, now let's move on to some sea salt. Since I'm going to make this a couple of loaves, I'm going to put in about a teaspoon, it's a little bit too much, a teaspoon of salt. I generally prefer about a ½ teaspoon of sea salt per loaf. So, and then I'm going to get some raw honey, and I'm just going to put in a couple of tablespoons worth of pure raw honey. And try to buy your pure raw honey as locally made as possible. That's always the best. And then oil, I used to use olive oil, but olive oil is really not good to be heated up, so I've lately been using grapeseed oil. So I'm going to put in about 1.5 tablespoons to 2 tablespoons of grapeseed oil, and I'm going to keep this handy as we're going to be using this again in a few minutes. Alright, now let's move on to the flour. I'm going to need to be refilling my flour canister somewhere through this process, so I already have a 5-pound bag of flour here to the side. So I've got another measuring cup, again 1 cup, and I think we should start by putting in 6 cups of flour. In my case, white flour, because I'm making white sourdough bread. Alright, so that's about 6 cups of flour in there. Let's get this bowl into the mixer. And attach the dough hook. And yeah, for years and years, I used to make 6 loaves of bread all by hand in a big bowl. It can be done, you just got to mix for a while. But let's get this first couple of loaves going in the mixer. Today, this was a perfect amount of ingredients. I did not need to add any water. I did not need to add any flour. So I just mix it until it becomes a sticky ball of dough that wants to be a ball of dough, but it is still very sticky. And I did not knead it for hardly any time at all. You don't need to knead this for much time at all. Mostly you just want to get it mixed together until all the ingredients are mixed together, and it is a very sticky ball of dough. And then if you want to knead it more, go for it. You don't need to. So let's get this out of here. See, very sticky dough. And the dough is going to be cold because remember, this is not pre-warmed ingredients like a yeast bread. These are from the fridge. All right, remember I said we're going to keep the grapeseed oil out? Here's why. Now, this dough is very sticky. I am going to just drizzle a bit of grapeseed oil on top and down the side. Just a bit. You can always add more if you need it. And I am going to spread the grapeseed oil on top of the dough. And now I'm going to start lifting the sticky dough from the sides and letting the grapeseed oil drip down the sides of the dough and to the bottom. There we go. Now I'm going to start working it off. I'm going to flip it over, and now I'm just going to rub the other side. All right, I now have a ball of dough that is no longer sticky because it is coated in some grapeseed oil. So I move this to the side, and I already have my loaf pans buttered. So I have 4 loaf pans buttered, so I'm going to get my 2 of them right now. And you want to butter them very liberally because you're going to want your bread to just slide right out of this when it's ready. Alright, so I'm going to grab my ball of dough, roughly divide it in half, and it does not have to be perfect. I always get my loaves slightly different sizes from each other, but they all work just fine. So, you don't have to be perfect in any of this. Alright. Now, I'm just going to kind of fold it inside out into a ball, roughly a gluten ball. I'm pinching the end closed. This is why I said don't wear jewelry. You don't need to be getting your wedding ring and your watch all gunky. Alright, I'm going to put the ugly side of this gluten ball face up into my loaf pan. And now I'm just using my knuckles to push the bread down into the pan. Then I'm just going to lift the dough out. Flip it over so that the smooth side is up. And now I'm just kind of smoothing and spreading around on the top. And this one is ready to be set to the side. Take my other ball. And again, just making a gluten ball, I am pinching it closed on top, the pinched ugly side, putting your loaf pan facing up, knuckle it down into the pan, and you know what, after knuckling this one into the pan, well, yeah, I'm going to flip it over. I was going to say I was going to leave that side up, but the other side is still smoother. Then flip it over so that the smooth side is up. Go ahead and smooth it out with your fingers a bit. My first 2 loaves are in their pans. Alright, now I'm going to wash my hands and then we're going to move on to the second 2 loaves. Alright, so I think I'm going to do 4 loaves today because we do have a thing we're going to, and I need to make a couple of homemade pizzas, so I don't think I'm going to have time to make 6 loaves of bread. But you saw how quick those 2 loaves went. Now, observe how quick this is going to go. So again, in your big bowl, take your sourdough starter. This is for making 2 loaves. You want to put in 2 cups of your sourdough starter. So once your starter's to the point where you're keeping it in the fridge, you need to feed it once a week. So even if you're not making bread once a week, you need to feed it once a week. And I'll show you me feeding mine before I pop it back in the fridge later on. So I'll set this to the side for now. All right, and then for liquid buttermilk, I'm going to add a little bit of water to this because this is not quite, I didn't quite do a whole quart jar because I need to leave room to shake my buttermilk, which you'll see in my buttermilk recipe. So I'm going to add a little bit of water to get this to equal a half a quart of what I have left. There we go. All right, so the rest of the buttermilk is going in. So that's 2 cups of homemade buttermilk. And that's probably all the liquid that we're going to need, but we'll see. That was all the liquid we needed for the first round. All right, so sea salt, 1 teaspoon of sea salt. We need roughly 2 tablespoons of pure raw honey. And then you need about 1.5 tablespoons to 2 tablespoons of oil. I suggest grapeseed oil. Avocado oil might also be good. All right, and then let's add to that 6 cups of flour. And again, you notice I don't measure my ingredients perfectly, so even though it was a perfect amount on the first round for the first 2 loaves, it might not be on this round, so we shall see. Pop my bowl in. Let's get the dough hook back on. Let's do our second 2 loaves, loaves 3 and 4. And again, perfection. This one looks like it's a little bit more stickier than the first round, but we still got to the goal, which was a ball of sticky dough. So let's get that removed. And again, you can view the stickiness as I get it off of the dough hook. And then we want to grab grapeseed oil, drizzle some on top, and then some down the side. And we want to just rub it all over the top of this big lump of dough. Now I'm going to start lifting it up so that I can get it to let go of the sides of the bowl and let the grapeseed oil drip down the sides. All right, now I'm going to start lifting it out of the bowl, so it's going to start getting to the bottom of the big lump of dough. I'm going to flip it over, pop it back in. Now I'm just rubbing the oil that dripped down on the other side. So now I have a big lump of dough here, and it is no longer very sticky because it is coated in a thin layer of oil. Move this to the side, and I'm going to get my other 2 buttered loaf pans. Now these loaf pans are a bit bigger. I prefer the smaller ones, narrow pans. The smaller pans are going to give me a higher loaf, as to where these bigger pans are going to give me a wider loaf. So I'm going to have 2 narrow high loaves and 2 wide loaves. All right, and just like before, I'm going to get the dough out of there, divide it into roughly 2 equal pieces. Never has to be perfect. It'll work out either way, and it smells really good. All right, forming my gluten ball, kind of just pulling it into a ball, pinching it closed on top. And for this one, I'm going to just put it in immediately ugly side down and just spread it out. Yeah, that works pretty good too, so you can do it either way. All right, I think that was a bit quicker. Here is loaf number 3. So I'm going to set that to the side. Since I'm only doing 4 loaves today, we are on our final loaf. Very liberally buttered bread loaf pan. Got my final lump of dough here. Forming it into a gluten ball, pinching it closed. And I'm going to put ugly side down, pretty side up. Then I'm just using my knuckles to gently spread it through the loaf pan. It's gorgeous. Then set this to the side. Alright, so I'm going to wash my hands. I'm going to put this stuff away. Then I'm going to show you how I feed my sourdough starter before I put that away. Okay, so my 4 loaves are set up to the side on the counter, and as soon as I feed and put away my sourdough starter, I am just going to kind of push them out of the way, and I'm just going to cover them up with paper towels on top of them, and they're going to rise for about 6 or 7 hours. I have plans tonight, and it involves me making a couple of large homemade pizzas and taking them with me. So this is going to do, the bread's going to do all of its rising while we're out, and when we get back tonight, the bread will probably be risen. Meanwhile, I'm going to show you how to feed the sourdough starter before you put it back in the fridge. So you need to make sure you have some left. So I'm a quart down. I used 1 quart of sourdough starter. I probably have 2 or 3 cups in here still. Alright, so 2 of those 2 or 3 cups, I need to make sure I add enough so that I can make another 4 to 6 loaves next week. So, let's start with 2 cups of flour. And I'm going to grab an additional measuring cup here. Alright, and get some water. And I'm going to start with 1 cup of water. Now I'm going to very gently mix this together, and I'm going to check the consistency. If it seems to be getting too thick, then I'll add another ½ cup to a cup of water. Remember, you want the consistency to be that of a runny pancake batter. Alright, I'm going to add another ½ cup of water. And I'm going to mix some more. Alright, and I am going to add another cup of flour. And I think another cup of water. So this is a ½ cup, so let's do 2 of these. This will replenish what I used, and that, and more so, and then that in conjunction with what I have left will give me more than enough to make 4 to 6 loaves next week. And this will also give me some extra so that if I want to give some sourdough starter to a friend, then I could take like a ½ cup out and pop it into a nice clean jar to give to a friend. And then they can take it home and feed it and get it to however much they need, and they can start using it. So if I were to give you some sourdough starter, I'd probably give you about a ½ cup because I wouldn't want to deplete my supply since I make a lot of bread. Then what you would do is when you get it home, you would want to put it in a bigger container, and again, make sure the lid has some slits in it so that some air can get in. And you can feed it and immediately put it in your fridge. So this is a good strong starter. So a ½ cup of starter, you're okay feeding it a cup of flour and a ½ cup to a cup of water. And then you pop it into the fridge and then wait a week. And then either use a cup to make 1 loaf of bread, or if you want to grow more starter, then feed it again. And if you want a lot more starter, then after you wait a week, you can put in 2 to 3 cups of flour and 2 to 3 cups of water, and then back into the fridge for a week. After that, you're going to have a lot of starter to make multiple loaves if you would like. So the thing with sourdough is make sure you feed your starter once a week, even if you're not planning on making any bread. So feed it at least minimum ½ cup, maybe even a whole cup of flour, and then some water each week. So if you end up getting too much and you're not making enough bread, then give some away, or make a bunch of bread and pop it in the freezer, or if you have to, throw some of your starter out, but that's always kind of sad. Alright, so I'm just going to do, this is the consistency I want. I just got some lumps in there still, so I am just going to give this a nice mix for a few more minutes. and then I'm going to pop on the lid and put this into the fridge. Alright, so I have the counter light off over here. So those are my 4 loaves of bread. I have them covered over with some paper towels, and they are going to sit there for about 6 or 7 hours, and then they'll be fully risen. If you find that your bread is not risen within several hours, let it go ahead and sit for a dozen hours. If it has not risen yet in that time, then your starter was not yet ready. So you need to put it back into the cupboard and just feed it every other day or so for about another week, and then let it sit for 2 days without feeding it in the cupboard, and then use it and try it again. Meanwhile, if you have bread dough sitting there that has not risen at all, you don't need to throw it out. You need to just knead in about a teaspoon of bread yeast, you know, the active dry bread yeast you can get from the store. Just knead some of that in really well, and then it'll be risen for you in an hour, and you can go ahead and bake it, and you will still have the sourdough flavor. But yeah, give this a try. Making a good starter can take a few tries sometimes. This time I was lucky. I got a good starter in the first try, and it's well worth it. Save lots of monies. I don't have to buy bread yeast, and I make my own bread, and I make my own leavening agent. Alright, well, I will click this back on in several hours and show you what these 4 babies look like fully risen. Alright, we are actually here 11.5 hours later. The bread is rising slow this week. Sometimes it does that, I've noticed. Last week it rose in about 7 hours. This week it took about 11.5 hours. So let's take a look. This was the first loaf that we made, so it's the most risen. Then the second. And then these 2 aren't going to go as high because the pans are wider and they have the same amount of dough in them as these 2. But yeah, I got the oven preheated, and I'm going to go ahead and get these going, and they're going to rise more in the oven. So here we go. And here they are just now out of the oven, and you can see that they indeed rose more in the oven, which is what I was expecting. So I am now going to get these bread loaves out of the pans and set them up to cool. Alright, so I just have them sitting out to cool, and I don't slice our homemade bread until it's completely cooled, because while it's cooling, it's still kind of cooking and doing its thing in the middle. So you don't want to slice warm bread. You want to let it cool before you slice it. So here we are the next day, because the bread did take a while to rise, and it was bedtime when it was done baking. So what I did is I let the bread sit out for about 10 minutes until I was able to touch it without burning my fingers. And then I just put all 4 loaves each in their own individual gallon freezer bag. And then I semi-closed it and then just left a little part open. And then I just left them leaning against the wall on the kitchen counter overnight. That way they can cool, humidity could escape, and then I'd be able to go ahead and get to them and slice them the next day. So here we are the next day, and it is time to slice those 4 beautiful loaves of sourdough bread. And you don't want to slice with a chef's knife or a regular knife. You want a bread knife that has that nice serrated edge. And this is the type of knife that's going to slice your bread well. So let's see how this looks. It's gorgeous. Let me slice in a little bit more so we can get towards the middle of the loaf, and then I'll show you how it looks. Alright, let's take a look at that. So I'm going to get the rest of these sliced, and I'm going to put 3 of the loaves in the freezer and have 1 loaf out. And this is how I am making sourdough bread. Have a blessed day.